1, 2, 3, yeah! This is Amari Purple Talk. Yes. Welcome to episode 74 of Amari Purple Talk, a podcast where I share my thoughts on the Prince musical singularity. I'm Richard Cole, your imagination funk soloist. Thank you once again for tuning in. Please leave your comments in the comment section below, and please download on your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And please continue to send your questions or topic suggestions for Amari Purple Talk. And how you can do that is by clicking the link in the show notes below, either the website link for Amari Commications or by following me on Twitter at RichardCole_now. Please use the hashtag Amari Purple Talk, and your topic or question might be read in a future episode. And before we start today's show, it's that time once again to remind everyone about part 2 of the Sign of the Times Super Deluxe Edition Twitter thread. That's hashtag Prince Twitter thread. The topics are still the vault tracks, so check out the previous contributors. Also, check out my previous submission of Strange Relationship. And this week, we have Candy Dami with the track Adonis and Bathsheba, and that's at Candy Dami on Twitter. And on January 21st, we have Rhonda Nicole at Rhonda Nicole _ breaking down the early vocal run-through of Forever in My Life. So this week, definitely check those Twitter threads out. And with that out of the way, let's start today's topic. And today's topic, we're going to focus on the Dirty Mind era, and hence the title. It is an era that we all are grateful for. All right, so basically, I like to call this the Prince musical singularity because there's a lot of us. We all love Prince. We all enjoy different eras, but at the same, also counting the various musicians and proteges and band members, you name it, that have been a part of his orbit, his creativity. Everybody's unique, different in their own way. Everybody has a favorite album or albums, a favorite era, concert tour, film, video, you name it. We're all one big part of that collective. And remember, everything is subjective. You know, there may be an album that somebody likes that I might not like. There may be a film that I like that somebody else might not like. And that's okay. You know, like I said, we're all part of one big collective. And at the end of the day, you know, we appreciate a particular artist's body of work, and that's what matters. But, you know, every now and then I kind of see on social media somewhere, we're all still in the glow of the Sign of the Times Super Deluxe Edition. You know, that is something that a lot of fans have been waiting for, oh God, forever. I know since basically the book DMSR, or Dance, Music, Sex, Romance, that book by Pierre Nelson, and reading about the original sequencing of the Crystal Ball album and all of those tracks. From reading that book, that is the thing that made me want a Sign of the Times box set the most. And, here we are in 2021, and we have that, and we're celebrating it. And, much to the slight of people that may enjoy other albums, other eras, there's a little bit of slight. And again, it's subjective. That's fine. But, I know I use a lot of Beatles analogy on this program. So I'm going to forego that and probably give the absolute best analogy that I can give for this particular topic. And this one is going to be focused on Michael Jackson. And, we all know Michael Jackson. We know, it started with the Jackson 5, went on his own. Well, he had solo albums even with the Jackson 5. And even with the Jacksons, Off the Wall was kind of in between Destiny and Triumph. But the real solo success didn't really start to happen till Thriller. And there are, all over the globe, millions, maybe possibly a billion or so, Michael Jackson fans that are Michael Jackson fans, meaning they may have Off the Wall, but they definitely have Thriller, or Thriller was their sort of gateway. And then, Bad, Dangerous, History, Invincible, that's that pocket of, or that particular stretch of Michael Jackson history that I would say an overwhelming number of Michael Jackson fans fall into that category. But then there are those like myself. I was around 4 years old in 1970. And the first Jackson song that I remember hearing is The Love You Save. And that was my gateway. 4 years old. That was my gateway to the Jackson 5. And kind of within that year or so, maybe a year and a half, I can't remember. But, I was given the ABC album. And that was my point of reference. That was my gateway. 6 years old, got to see them live at the Kill Auditorium. So basically, my point of I was there for that journey. Jackson 5, then them leaving Motown, the Jacksons, then Off the Wall, then more Jacksons, then Thriller, and it goes on from there. But again, it's not a slight to anyone who jumped on at Thriller or jumped on at Bad or whenever point that you were born and the first Michael Jackson song. Some people may have even, their first experience, maybe they had a parent or an older sibling that had the Jackson 5 or had the Jacksons, and that was their gateway. And then they caught up very quickly to whatever their present form of reference was, if they were 10 or 15 or 20 or whatever, and just getting exposed to, the current, whatever was current at the time. So if Bad was currently out. So you see what I'm saying? But there would not have been a Thriller had it not been for the Jackson 5 or the whole Motown period for the Jackson 5. Because if it wasn't for that, then they wouldn't have left Motown in 1975. Then there wouldn't have been the Jacksons era. There would have been no Enjoy Yourself, no Going Places, no, Shake Your Body Down to the Ground, no Lovely One, no Heartbreak Hotel or This Place Hotel or whatever they want to call the song. There would have been none of that had there not been a reference point. Or let's just say if things ended, because at Motown, by the time you got to 73, 74, 75, they still kind of had hits. Or they were still getting some radio play. They were still on television. But, the sales weren't as strong or consistent as when I Want You Back was a hit, or ABC, or I'll Be There was a hit. So it's like, yeah, Thriller might be your favorite album, Bad might be your favorite album, but none of that would have been possible had it not been for what came before that. And the same thing with Prince. Like I said, this is the best analogy I could come up with. With Prince, I mean, granted, for me, yes, Sign of the Times is my absolute favorite Prince album. And Artificial Age is in my top 5 favorite Prince albums. Now, for me personally, yeah, Dirty Mind was my gateway album. And I've told this story maybe 2-3 times on this show. But to recap, in 1978, summer, I think, like I said, I just had a little period of insomnia for like maybe that weekend. I can't remember how long it was, but yeah, just I guess probably because it was summer and extremely hot, and we didn't have central air at the time, so we had like just electric fans going in the house. But even with the electric fans, it was still summer, and you still felt hot and whatever. So that might have played into it. Anyway, so to help me deal with the insomnia, I have the radio on and I'd have it kind of low so it wouldn't disturb anybody else in the house. And we had about good 4 black radio stations. KATZ, WESL on the AM side. And then there was, at that time, before Magic 108 and Magic 105 and everything else Magic that came along in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, there was KKSS FM. And probably just because the signal was better, I had it on KKSS FM. So they would play like a block of songs. So by the time I turned it on, they would be in the middle of the block of songs. And kind of for like maybe 2-3 nights in a row during this certain block of songs. God, I wish I could remember what else was playing in that particular rotation. But I do remember Soft and Wet being played. And they never said who it was. I remember the tune. I remember the melody of it. When I finally got hold of the record, or when I finally realized it was Prince, a few years down the line. But originally that was my gateway, but I never knew who it was. It was probably in there, let's see, I think Peter Brown, that was still much later, but he was still getting played on the radio. But kind of given the context, this was a time when Prince was just one of the musics. If like for me, my mainstays were the Jackson 5. The Jacksons by that point. And then Parliament Funkadelic. Those were sort of my mainstays. And, where it's one of those things like I got to have every record. Like I had most of their records. But at that time, like, if I was in a position to get the For You album, which, being 12, I wasn't, I didn't, that would have been one of the musics. Like when I bought 45s, like I bought the 2 hits from Peter Brown, Dance With Me, Do You Want to Get Funky With Me? I had those. So like Soft and Wet, if I was in the position to get the single, or if I knew who it was to get the single, that's where it would have began and ended right there. And then the next album came out. My uncle tried his darndest to get me to get into that album, and I just didn't want to be bothered. And he kept saying, "Oh, it's better than Michael Jackson." And I was in this is 1979 at this point, and no, I'm I'm an off the wall fanatic. That was the greatest album on earth in 1979 and 80. And there wasn't anybody that could tell me that there was somebody better than Michael Jackson at that particular point. Finally, we get to around summer, spring, late spring, summer 1981. And a friend of mine down the street would borrow records from other people. And by this time, like I think that Christmas before or something, or birthday, I'd gotten a component set. And it had the tape deck and everything. And it even had 8-track too. That was kind of cool. And it was recordable 8-track. But I still used mostly the cassette part of it and the turntable, so that was sort of my physical media of choice. But my friend Marvin, who lived down the street, would borrow records from other people, bring them over to the house and, make tapes, and then, take the tapes, take the records, give the records back to whoever he borrowed them from. And he'd have his copies. And depending on the album, I might make a copy for myself too. But this particular day, and I remember it was on a Saturday, and it had been maybe spring, summer, late spring, early summer. And he brought over Tina Marie's Irons in the Fire and Prince's Dirty Mind album. And like I said, I ain't want to be bothered. I ain't want to know. It's like, why you bring this album in my house? We put on the Tina Marie record first, and he made a copy of that, and then flipped the tape over, and then made the Dirty Mind one. Now, I was kind of halfway listening because I didn't want to be bothered, but the Tina Marie I took to right away. That was, so basically I became fans of those artists that same time frame. So, as fate would have it, he made the tape and took the records back, but he left the tape behind. And maybe fast forward a week, couple of weeks, or whatever, it's another Saturday. I'm bored out of my skull. I've played all the records that I already had. I wanted to listen to something new, but, I ain't have any loot to buy any new records at the moment. And there was this tape. So, I kind of grooved off the Tina Marie for a while, and then I flipped the tape over and I'll give this Prince another listen. So I put it on, and a Prince fan was born. And it was just all the elements of that particular album that did it. It was the new wave, because at that time, and this is before MTV, there used to be a show called Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. And it used to come on like in the afternoons on Saturday where I lived. But by the time I was 15, they had moved it to like real late at night. It came out like after the Three Stooges. So being 15 and able to stay up, later than normal on a Saturday. So my thing would be, it would be Eddie Murphy era Saturday Night Live. Then flip over to Channel 11, watch the Three Stooges, and they would show like Three Stooges for like an hour, hour and a half or something like that. And then after that, maybe close to like 2 a.m, then there would be Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. And at that time, that's when they would have like the Cars and the Police and the Pretenders. And, I got into all of those groups that way. And hearing those kind of similar sounds on Dirty Mind, because, the first 2 Prince albums were your typical, well, not even typical, it would have been regulated to like your typical R&B. It was no different than what Smokey was doing. Well, the only unique thing was that the keyboards, the way he would arrange those and program the keyboards and play the keyboards, the synths, the Oberheims, all of that stuff, That was innovative. And for somebody at that age, probably one of the youngest, if not the youngest, to do that, that was the genius for those two albums. But what he was doing, yeah, he was showing some versatility. But, it was always being compared to Smokey. It was being compared to Michael. It was being compared to Stevie Wonder. And basically, Warner Brothers signed him on the strength of, ooh, we got our own Stevie Wonder now. But with this album, you got to reflect, looking back on it, just coming off of being the opening act for Rick James, having a house to where he now has his own 16-track studio. This is kind of one of the beginnings of the sort of do-it-yourself record. Because, maybe prior to Prince, maybe the only ones doing that, Paul McCartney with the first McCartney album, and then by 1980 he had McCartney 2, where he played all the instruments. Stevie Wonder, those kind of first few of the classic 70s era, half the record would be Stevie playing all of the instruments. And then you had what I found out maybe a few years ago, Boston. I forget the guy. There's one guy that played all the instruments and everything on the album, but put the band together for the touring. So I have to look that up another time. Or, for those in the know, put a comment in the comment section. But not a lot of people were doing that at the time. But to have somebody at that young of an age to do that, again, that was the genius. That was the marketing. That was the selling point of that. But to be able to, by the time of 1980, coming off the Rick James tour and having a home studio set up was, again, it was another stroke of genius. It allowed him to really stretch out his ideas, at his own pace. Even though Warner Brothers paid for the equipment, it still gave him the freedom to create when he wanted to now. So he didn't just have to rely on recording studios in LA. He could just record at home as well as record in LA or wherever, he would find himself. And, he never wanted to be pigeonholed as an artist anyway. The whole misconception of the "don't make me black" quote, it wasn't him selling out. It wasn't him, sacrificing who he was for the sake of crossover. He was very secure in who he was as a black man. But to show that he could be just as versatile, just as talented, or could be just as successful just doing music how he felt was the whole point of that. And with Dirty Mind, that was the beginning of him being able to sort of flex those musical muscles to do that. What the critics were saying about Dirty Mind. Now remember, this was not like Purple Rain numbers. These weren't even the numbers of the album before. The second album was close to platinum. Where For You at that particular time, it was around, I think, 100,000 copies or so. Now, you got to remember, the record industry in those days is a lot different than the record industry of today. Today, if you don't sell 1 million, 2 million right off the bat, a record company is virtually done with you. The 70s going into the 80s was sort of the last gasp of this thing called artist development. Meaning that if you didn't have what it took. You're developing. Okay, fine. This is your first album. Of course, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to stumble. Or not everybody's going to catch on to what you're trying to convey as an artist. So it might take 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 albums. You look at the history of Motown and you look at the Supremes, you look at the Temptations. They had been on that label for 4 or 5 years before they even got a #1 hit. They had record after record, 45 after 45 after 45, maybe 12, 13 flops apiece before each of those groups by 1964 and 1965 started generating a run of nonstop hits at the time. Because, like I said, it took a while, for people to catch on. Now, because everything's so instant, starting with MTV, everything's instant. And then the internet age and the streaming age and YouTube and everything, now everything is so, we want things quick and we're not as patient as we should be with, any artist, even some of the ones that, it's like, we want it now, we want it right now, now. But, Dirty Mind came along at the absolute right time, where you had this artist that had a couple of, I would say minor to somewhat major success with his first 2 albums. And then to take a big risk and a big gamble because, again, he didn't want to be pigeonholed. And again, what was happening, disco was on the way out. The new wave, punk, that was gaining more strength and popularity. Hip hop, it was still just Sugar Hill Gang, and it was still just Grandmaster Flash. It was still just Curtis Blow. And, that was the beginning of something just totally brand new, but it hadn't really caught on to the absolute mainstream yet. But the beauty of Dirty Mind was that the critics understood what was happening with it. They saw the potential of a brand new Sly Stone, a brand new Jimi Hendrix. And while, yeah, Michael Jackson was great, then we weren't privy to the powerhouse Michael Jackson that could write a Billie Jean, that could write Beat It yet. We hadn't gotten there yet. So we knew Michael Jackson is somebody, okay, well, whoever's writing for him, that's the song he's going to sing. And we get that. So as a dynamic singer and entertainer, we got that. We hadn't gotten to songwriter Michael Jackson yet. Now, Smokey Robinson, as great of a songwriter as he is, like I said, one of the greatest poets of all time with his body of work. And Stevie Wonder was just genius level. But again, it was kind of still pigeonholed in this R&B pocket. Maybe early on there were some comparisons to the Bee Gees with the Prince albums. But when you start to cross over into Sly Stone and Hendrix, now you're in serious genius territory, because they were able to capture the rock mainstream. Sly was able to capture a people, both black and white. Hendrix, got huge rock credibility. That's the kind of credibility that Prince wanted. He didn't want to be pigeonholed like, oh, I just play guitar. Oh, I just write R&B songs. Or I just do funk. No, I want to capture a people. And took a risk. This was, post what you call sexual revolution. Everything that had been going on from the hippie era in the 60s all the way to what's happening, late 70s. Disco was a part of that whole thing. You have women's independent movements. that type of thing, and all of that sort of became the catalyst to create the platform in which Dirty Mind exists. In that, and granted, yeah, with the subject matter, yeah, it was controversial, yeah, it was taboo. Warner Brothers had a hard time marketing it, and but it took the executives at Warner Brothers to go ahead and take that risk, and it paid off. Like I said, it didn't pay off sales wise. In other words, Dirty Mind didn't become a gold selling album until the success of Purple Rain. But it set the foundation for the critics to accept it, to get the word of mouth generated. So by the time Prince began to tour with this particular album, and it began in New York, where a lot of the punk and the new wave was coming out of at that time, it allowed him to be seen by sort of the rock establishment. Now, the tour, I think it started, or one of the first appearances, after the release of Dirty Mind, it was in New York. I believe it might have been the Ritz, and it was on the day or the day after the assassination of John Lennon. And it wasn't quite a packed house, but the artist Andy Warhol was there to see that, to see Prince perform. And again, it generated that word of mouth, and the whole thing, which, Prince plays out in the song, All the Critics Love You in New York. Yeah, it's like that old song, New York, New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And again, that opened the door, again, Mick Jagger saw it, said, hey, this is something new. This is, a kid that's doing something different, and it's exciting, and I like the music. Hey, why don't you open up for the Rolling Stones? Even though that didn't quite turn out the way everybody thought it would have turned out. But again, that set the stage for him to go back and do, 1999. Of course, controversy was sort of in between. When he got the invitation, controversy had just been finished. So, but that set the stage for 1999, which was the beginning of the massive crossover success. Because again, controversy really was, for us, it was a black album. It was mostly being played on black radio. Like I said, Dirty Mind was my gateway in this, around the summer of '81. So about 3, 4, 5 months later, when Controversy was released as a single, but the radio stations had the album version, and they played the album version of it. So imagine again, 15, brand new record, Controversies being played on the radio. It's the album version, and it's funky, and the lyrics is like, okay, he's calling out people again, because he created that image, he created that look, and he knew. And of course there was people that didn't get what was going on. There were people that there was some backlash, like, well, what is this? If this was David Bowie, there'd be really no real problem with it. He'd go sell out a stadium and that would be it. But again, we're talking about somebody black kicking down a bunch of doors and sort of challenging the establishment, or challenging the status quo, or challenging perceptions in general, in order to maintain a mystique or create a mystique or an image, and at the same time create great music. So it's not just the image itself, which is what a lot of things now are. It's all it's all image and no substance. Prince had the image, he had the substance. And for me in 1981 at 15, this was what I was needing. This was because I would read about, the artists of the 50s. I used to read about Elvis and Little Richard and Chuck Berry, and how rock and roll sort of became this thing. The kids at that time in the 50s, this was sort of the soundtrack to whatever, their rebellion or their movement. Same thing in the 60s. You have with the Beatles and the Stones and Motown and Stax and, Aretha and Sly and Hendrix and you name it. The whole decade of the 60s was this one big movement. And to me, I was aware that, once it got past maybe 1975, everything was just kind of, it was great music still coming through, and there's a lot of great disco songs coming through. But it seemed, to me, it just seemed a little bit just kind of, I don't know, kind of just straight line. It was just like everything was accepted, and especially with disco, when you had Disco Duck and Ethel Merman had a disco record and God, Star Wars had a disco, record, or you put the theme to Star Wars to disco, or you put the Fifth of Beethoven to a disco sound, so everything was just this acceptance, but it was different in a way. It was, to me, it was kind of, when it got to that part of it, it was more of a contrived kind of thing. And there was nobody challenging the status quo, God, granted, Dirty Mind, it's to me, I think with that particular track, the music is what sells it because it's this total new wave thing. It's got a little bit of funkiness to it, but it's got the new wave elements. It's got the synth lines to it, and it's kind of more, it's raw because it was done at home. It was kind of like what we all do now with our computers now. Or if you have a 4-track still cassette, whatever, which I still kind of work with sometimes, but I also have the platform in which I record this show, and I can do multi-tracks of things too. And, we all do that now, but again, for then, that was not normal. That was not the norm. Not everybody could afford to put not even a 4-track in the house. Not a lot of people can afford a bunch of instruments or synths or anything at that time. So to have an artist on that level be able to do that from home, it was very raw. It wasn't polished. It wasn't, overproduced, which you can run into that in bigger studios. You also had When You Were Mine, which was, Beatles influence, but that's new wave was sort of bringing that sort of 50s and kind of early 60s and maybe some of those Beatle elements, but it was done, you use synthesizers along with the electric guitars, or you used electric drums, whether it was a drum machine or an electric drum kit sometimes, and sometimes acoustic drums too, and then the synths would make the new wave or the punk sound or whatever. You had that, but it was very Beatle-y, and it was very Beatle influence. Prince said that he heard John Lennon on the radio, and maybe it was Please Please Me or whatever song it was. But it's like, hey, well, I can write a Beatles song too, and here's When You Were Mine. My two sort of, album tracks, my favorite album tracks of that record are Do It All Night and Got a Broken Heart Again. When you play those back to back, they're just great. Everything about that record, it challenged what my perceptions about Prince were, or my resistance. It challenged my resistance to Prince. Like I said, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, if you caught me on a different day and played me the second album, then I might have become a fan a bit sooner. But again, like I said, the stars sort of lined up for my friend to forget that cassette tape that day. And I was able to listen, you know, with a fresh pair of ears. And some of the things, like I said, I like the new wave because I watched Don Kirshner's rock concert. And I like the Cars and the Police. And I like, the Pretenders. And all of that was played. They even played like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And just like, wow, just it was a different kind of music than what I was hearing on KKSS FM or KATZ or WESL at that time. And, yeah, you had Parliament Funkadelic that were in a class by themselves, but that was my lane. Rick James, street songs, that was my lane. Like I said, the Jacksons, Stevie Wonder, Earth, Wind and Fire, that was my lane. Maybe the not so much in the lane were the Beatles. That was sort of the only alternative thing that I had that wasn't sort of mainstream, R&B or mainstream funk at that time, So here having Prince embrace that, it was like, well, that was able to reach me because up until that point, I've had like maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 Beatle albums at that point at 15. So that was able to reach me. And, Do It All Night and Got a Broken Heart Again. Those are pretty good songs. They're good album tracks, which it's hard to do now so much, even though vinyl is back. So maybe it's easier to get involved with the album tracks or listen to the record from beginning to end now instead of streaming where you can still cherry pick things. But it just, they belong on that album. Even though had he not taken the risk, yeah, those 2 songs still would have been Second Prince album part 2. Still, you can see maybe that was sort of the beginnings, but then here's Dirty Mind now. And then you flip it over, then you got Uptown, which was, to me, it's very late 70s Stones. There's Miss You, there's Emotional Rescue, kind of, that sort of funk. It's Prince doing Mick Jagger in a Prince way, sort of, and it works. He's able to kind of take that style and make it his own. Head was the one that just said, that's it. I am now a Prince fan because it is as funky as all get out. And to me, that record stands up with just about any Parliament record in existence. So that was it. That was the one that said, okay, this dude is for real. This dude is for real. He brought all the other influences and he can be funky. So I'm in. And then Sister, that's, controversial lyrics. And yet still got that punk element to it. It's that CBGB's club sound. You can hear the Ramones in there, or you can hear the B-52s in there, or whatever, Blondie, whoever. You can hear that in that. And it's like, wow, he can do that too. Okay, that's nice. And then Party Up, it's funky. And it had that sort of anti-war vibe that, I was used to hearing in, all those records from the 60s and everything. And it's like, here that is, and it's brought up to date, because, yeah, there was still stuff brewing. There were all kind of conflicts in the Middle East going on, even at that time. Inflation, what was going on in New York, the things that sort of kind of that energy that gave birth to hip hop. New York, was a heavy place in those days. And on the flip side of things, you had where Jimmy Carter had ended the draft. Ain't got the draft, just laugh, party up, because every conflict, it's up to you to make the decision. Is it a conflict that's in the best interest for the safety and security of where you live? If you want to enlist and sign up for that, If you feel that it is wrong and unjust, then you now have the freedom to say, hey, I don't want to participate in that. Or it's against my moral, compass to take a human life, regardless of the circumstances. And you can no longer be forced into that, or, prove or go out of your way to prove that you're a conscientious objector of sorts. So, that track, and then it ends with, you're going to have to fight your own damn war because we don't want to fight no more. And, you can even take that a step deeper and say that is black man's experience, because it's every single conflict that black men and even black women have participated in to prove that they are just as patriotic as anyone else living in this country, and to go out of your way to fight wars, the Tuskegee Airmen or any infantry, to prove that you're just as patriotic, and then to come home and still be treated like a second-class citizen, to be seen as your life doesn't matter, regardless that, hey, you fought for this country or you died for this country. You could take that lyric a step further and say, well, you know what? You're going to have to fight your own damn war because we don't want to fight no more. And again, this weekend was Muhammad Ali's birthday. And the example that he set for refusing the draft, it echoes in that sentiment. And given what we know how big of a fan of Muhammad Ali that Prince was, yeah, that lyric is a direct echo of the point that Muhammad Ali was trying to make as well. And you have all of these elements wrapped up into an album that was designed to be taken on its own merits. It wasn't designed to be a fluffy pop album. It wasn't going to be another disco album. It's not anywhere near mainstream radio of any sort, R&B, pop, whatever. This is an artist that figured out how to flex his creative muscles, how to utilize that creative energy and tap into a different frequency that was going to create a musical singularity that, there's no place that's more fun. Beatles are great, everybody, any other music, Stevie Wonder's great and everything, but it's like the Prince musical singularity is a very special place to be. It is so diverse, but this to me was the absolute flashpoint of all of that. And again, regardless of what your favorite Prince album is, regardless of what your favorite era may be, none of it would exist if this little album didn't have the strong legs to create the momentum that would have allowed your favorite era or your favorite album after Dirty Mind to exist. And granted, that's the thing, hey, the 80s are the legendary period, starting with this album. This album was released in 1980. And it has nothing to really do with the fact that people like me were there when it was unfolding in real time. It's just that that is the period in which every single artist, when they are in their whatever, late teens, early to mid 20s, it's just something about that particular age when you are an artist and you create that body of work and it catches on. There's a magic in that. I mean, because look at the flip side of it. Prince was able to be consistent, and he also recognized the fact that not every album was going to be a winner with every single person. And I think in knowing that, and especially after he gained independence from Warner Brothers, where the pressure was off to like, oh, I got to create a hit single. Oh, I got to make sure this album sells 2 million or whatever. Once that pressure was off, then he was able to just write what he felt and play what he felt. You look at Stevie Wonder. I mean, there's so much great Stevie Wonder music and quite a few great Stevie Wonder songs after Hotter Than July. But the way he gets picked apart for not living up to his 70s output, that's a crime. And that could have easily had been Prince too. So that's the other thing too. You could have had an artist where, yeah, it just would have just stopped in 1989 or 90. It would have stopped with Batman or Lovesexy or Graffiti Bridge and just could have halted right there. But the message I would probably just want to convey to people that hold on to a particular era is that you just have to be patient. When you look at, there's very few artists that have the consistency of Prince. It's just that in his case, yes, the 80s, the classic era, yeah, that was the biggest. That was the most talked about. That was probably, in the eyes of the label, the most successful period. And if you're going to if you're going to be a Sony legacy, then you are going to have that be the starting point. Well, it's already kicked off because we had Sign of the Times, 1999, Purple Rain. We'll see Purple Rain again, maybe as a bigger deluxe set. But you just have to be patient because you're going to have to go through all of that. Reissues. Again, we're going to have to start from the beginning and work our way through the 80s or whatever. But I'll ask you to take a really good look at what Sony has been releasing with Bob Dylan's material since 1990. Start with that Biograph set and look at every single box set that has been released. Because, yeah, the Unfair Title with Bob Dylan, the voice of a generation, which means that, yes, the focus is going to be on his 60s material. But he had albums in the 70s. He also had a thing too, like Prince, where he had this big spiritual conversion. In Bob's case, it was into Christianity, born again Christian. And those records reflect that. And just recently, that material had been given a box set treatment as well. And that was right after the previous box set, which focused on the Blood on the Tracks album and the Rolling Thunder tour and those things. So just be patient. You will get your box set, or you will get a re-release, or whatever, live concert from whatever. It will happen. But you can't ignore, or you can't let it affect you so bad that the attention is spent on the thing that made him famous in the first place. Because without it, again, there would be no modern era. I don't know. Maybe I'll do a show focusing on what my particular favorites are. But yeah, I grew up in the 80s, so yeah, that's my go-to. That's going to be number one always. Number two favorite era, we discussed it last episode. 1993 to 1994. To me, that was just as exciting as the 80s. Because though I enjoyed Diamonds and Pearls, I kind of burned out on it after a while. The Symbol album, I played it recently and it wasn't that bad. But after that, to me, the music got more exciting to me. And it was just as exciting as the 80s stuff. Then when you kind of get post-emancipation, yeah, albums are kind of hit and miss, but I still enjoyed certain songs. But it really wasn't until, Rainbow Children, I definitely think that album, that's what a 40-something-year-old Prince should have been sounding like anyway. Never mind the Jehovah's Witness stuff, but that was an album an artist should have been making, regard Prince or anybody, at 40-something. Then Musicology is good. 3121 is very good. I am not a fan of Planet Earth. That has been no big secret. But I enjoy the heck out of 2010. And again, Artificial Age is in my top 5 favorite Prince albums, period. But none of that would have been possible had it been not for the little album that could, called Dirty Mind. And we wouldn't have Prince podcast of every caliber to exist. We wouldn't have Prince Twitter threads had it not been for that record. And, thanks to Marvin for leaving that cassette behind, because I would have been missing out on a whole bunch of stuff and probably would have not been able to meet and have as friends not only you guys and the other podcasters and writers, but there's people that I consider sometimes more family than family, that have been best friends for decades. Had it not been for this album being the flashpoint that just unfolded an entire, again, musical singularity of just pure purple funkiness. But again, what's most important is, what do you think? Is this your favorite album? Or do you recognize that without this era, we wouldn't get to enjoy so many other Prince eras over the decades? Or just let me know what your favorite Prince album is, or what your gateway album was. That's what I want to know. What was your gateway album? What started it all off for you? So leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. And we're going to end this episode of Amari Purple Talk. Please check back with us next week. Check out my website, Amari Commications. Also pick up some or purchase some Amari Purple Talk gear, t-shirts, coffee mugs. There's other cool Amari merchandise that I've created out of my crazy imagination. And all of that helps to keep this show going and also finance a few other projects that I am currently working on. And as always, like I said, this is 2021. And again, let's just try to leave this world a little bit better than how we found it. In fact, let's make it a lot better than how we found it. Because again, we got to end this pandemic. Also, again, the other virus, which is racism, white supremacy, that all has to go. It's all about love for one another. And let's strive to keep doing that. And till then, let's keep it purple and on the one.